Good morning, everyone, and welcome to WRHU's continuing coverage of the 2020 New York primary elections. I'm Eli Finkelson alongside Natalie Kate.
As we've been reporting, this election has been a unique one for a couple of reasons. Many voters opted to submit their ballots by mail in an effort to avoid crowds amidst the coronavirus pandemic. The election also took place during a time of civil unrest as protesters call for reforms to policing and to end systemic racism.
Last night, you heard from many congressional candidates on Long Island. We do have some results to report. However, winners have not been declared in most of the races. There are reportedly 1.8 million absentee ballots to be counted statewide, and absentee ballots cannot be tabulated until July 1st.
Let's take a look at some of the results that are in so far. In the first congressional district, 4 Democrats were on the ballot, looking for a chance to face Republican incumbent Lee Zeldin in November. Businessman Perry Gershon, who has spoken out against President Trump, is in front of second-place finisher Nancy Goroff, a chemistry professor at Stony Brook University, by 164 votes, with 100% of the precincts supporting. Gershon has not officially been declared the winner.
District 2 will have a new representative as Republican Peter King is not running for re-election after serving in Congress for 28 years. State Assemblyman Andrew Garbarino, who is endorsed by King, has 63.4% of the vote, while Republican opponent and fellow State Assemblyman Mike LaPetri has 36.6%, with 70% of precincts reporting.
On the Democratic side, in District 2, Jackie Gordon has 73% of the vote, while Patricia Mayer has 27%, with 71% of the precincts reporting. Gordon has served in the U.S. military and been a member of the Babylon Town Council.
In District 3, incumbent Representative Tom Suozzi faced 2 progressive candidates, Melanie DeRigo and Michael Weinstock. With 45% of precincts reporting, Suozzi has 58.9% of the vote, DeRigo has 32%, and Weinstock has 8%. The winner will face Republican George DeVolder Santos in November.
Less than 1% of the results have been reported in the District 2 race, but the earliest results given Town of Hempstead Engineering Commissioner Doug Tooman a lead of about 2,600 votes over Jews activist and radio host Sidney Gross, who is said to be an ally for President Trump.
In District 5, incumbent Gregory Meeks has been declared the winner in the Democratic primary. With 8% of precincts reporting, Meeks has 78% of the vote, while challenger Shanya Chowdhury, who ran on a progressive platform, has 22%.
Elsewhere in New York, Democratic Representative Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez has reportedly won the primary in District 14. She will face Republican John Cummings in November.
On the national level, the New York Republican presidential primary was canceled, and President Donald Trump is expected to be renominated. The Democrats still held a primary in New York last night, and former Vice President Joe Biden is expected to win with 67% of the vote. Biden has already secured enough delegates to win the nomination, and no other candidates are actively campaigning against him. Both the Republican and Democratic conventions are scheduled for August.
Kentucky also held its primary last night. The state reduced the number of polling places from 3,700 to fewer than 200 due to the coronavirus concerns. A judge extended voting by 30 minutes yesterday, allowing more than 100 people waiting outside a polling place in Louisville to cast their ballots.
Former Marine pilot Amy McGrath faced State Representative Charles Booker in the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate. McGrath was the frontrunner for much of the campaign, but Booker, who is African American, has gained momentum amidst ongoing civil rights protests. The winner of the Kentucky primary will face Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in November. With 54% of precincts reporting, McGrath leads by about 5,000 votes. She has 44.7%, while Booker has 36.5%.
Now we will take a look to see how the coronavirus pandemic, civil rights protests, and other current events shape the primaries and how they could impact the general election in November. We're joined by Larry Levy, the Dean of the National Center for Suburban Studies at Hofstra University. Dean Levy, thank you for joining us this morning.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Now, we saw more mail-in and early voting due to the coronavirus. Do you think that had any impact on voter turnout?
It clearly had an impact. Voters, as we saw in school board elections last month, responded very well to the opportunity to go to the polls with the U.S. Postal Service. This is going to be an important factor in November, particularly if the virus is still slamming us as hard as it is. People are, as you mentioned in your introductions, concerned about going out in public, whether it's the virus or they're nervous about protests in their area, although we didn't really see any on election day. So giving people an opportunity to vote when they might have stayed home and not, and that's really, really important. What'll be interesting will be to see when we get some analysis of the demographics of who used the mail-in. We've always seen for a long, long time a drop-off in millennials, college-age students a little bit older, in going to the polls. The turnout in 2018, millennials did pretty well in terms of turnout, but they will be decisive in the presidential election in November. And if they were to use mail ballots, it would tell you something. Of course, if you did it online, you'd get more millennials in the mail, because I don't know anybody that age who actually uses the mail or a landline. So, we have to see how this works out.
And do you think that mail-in and early voting will become more common in future elections beyond November, even when the pandemic subsides?
Absolutely. It's a little like working remotely. A lot of businesses were very hesitant to do that, but once they were forced to, some of them realized this is not such a bad thing. I don't have to provide office space. My employees are happier. Mail-in ballots will be the same thing. Once folks try something and they like it, and the system doesn't come crashing down, as some people like to predict, anytime something new comes along, it will become much more of, if not always, a fixture.
And in what ways, if any, are primary results indicative of what might happen in the general election?
Primary results can be indicative. For instance, take last night, of course. I looked for elevated turnout in some of the primaries. For instance, and we don't know what the final results are. They haven't tabulated all the votes, so you can't answer the question. But if, for example, in the 1st congressional district, 5 Democrats competing to face Lee Zeldin, if there were elevated turnout there, people streaming to the polls, whether it's in person, early election day, or by mail, it tells you something about what we call energy and the potential for engagement on the Democratic side, whatever that reason is, whether they're upset with President Trump or Zeldin himself, we don't know. But it would tell you that people are interested enough at least to vote. In the Republican primary in the 2nd district, again, you had a party choice. The Nassau and Suffolk Republican leaders picked Andrew Garbarino. Mike LaPetri decided, well, he didn't care what the elders in his party said. He was going to run a primary. Well, if LaPetri had won, it would have told you something about the ability of the 2 county organizations, Republican organizations, to get out the vote. It would mean that they don't have the ability, the clout that they once had. But it looks like Garbarino, even once the mail-in ballots are counted, will probably win. He's far enough ahead that you'd have to see something really extraordinary to turn that around. So you read the tea leaves, and you look for what it might tell you about people's feelings about President Trump or about a party organization.
Now, President Trump has been criticized for his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. How much of an impact do you think that will have, that criticism will have on the election in November?
Well, November, that's a lot of tea leaf reading. And one of the points I made last night when I was doing analysis for another station was that think about 3 months ago, when folks looked ahead to the New York primary, they thought this was going to be the coronation of Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. It looked like this is where he would get the delegates that could put him over the top. But things can change dramatically in politics. So Donald Trump has very low approval ratings, the lowest we've seen from him. Then again, he got elected president with the lowest approval rating for any candidate, winning candidate. So 3 months can be a very long time. That said, you can bet that COVID, the Black Lives Matters protests will be major factors for both parties, for Trump supporters and for his detractors. and we don't really know how it'll play out. One thing I can say is that for more than a generation, the way suburbanites have voted has determined national elections, the presidency and control of Congress. And President Trump has not been doing well lately with suburban voters. And so what happened last night, we were hoping to get a little bit of a fix on where things were going, but it's going to be days and days before we can definitively say whether that's true.
And how did the ongoing civil rights protests that are going on right now impact the primary elections?
They probably created a lot more energy on the Democratic side. A lot of progressive and liberal, even moderate Democrats, as well as independents who couldn't vote, have been touched by the death of Mr. Floyd. And you see people out protesting who probably haven't done it since they were in college, if they ever did it when they were, away at school. So it clearly is energizing people who are not happy with the president and his performance and his statements in the wake of the demonstrations. How that'll play out, it's really hard to say. Whether it'll depress Republican turnout, again, can't read the tea leaves because I don't have the number of votes that came out yesterday and during the week with the mail-ins.
Well, Dean Levy, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Our thanks again to Larry Levy, the Dean of the National Center for Suburban Studies at Hofstra University.
And that will do it for our special coverage of the 2020 New York primaries. Our engineer today was Sarah Hendricks.
Tune in to Newsline Monday through Friday at 5:30 and 10:30 p.m. to hear election results, the latest on the coronavirus pandemic, and other local and national news. Only on 88.7 FM, Radio Hofstra University. For WRHU, I'm Natalie Kate.
And I'm Eli Finkelson. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day.